Okay, we are broadcasting.
Okay.
Should be in a position where both of us are audible to the Twitch stream so that the video works this time. To begin with, this time, we the second half of the last time was fine, but okay, we're live. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike Mateen.
And tonight we're talking about Christmas movies. In particular, we are discussing Christmas central movies versus Christmas adjacent movies. Not versus in the context of like we're making them fight, but rather just exploring deeper the idea of like there's the old argument that comes around every year where people, and it's not even really an argument anymore as much as people who like Die Hard like to bring up every year that it is a Christmas movie no matter who says it isn't, despite the fact that there's not really that many people saying that it isn't, I don't think. But but it's an excuse for people who like Die Hard to talk about liking Die Hard, which is perfectly acceptable in my book.
Yeah, and it was a great reason to just go rewatch Die Hard.
Yeah. So basically, we wanted to use this opportunity to talk a little bit about like, well, what makes a Christmas movie? What defines whether something is or is not a Christmas movie? Is it something as clearly, defined as takes place at Christmas? Could you have a Christmas movie that doesn't take place at Christmas? What about movies that are about Christmas versus the movies that are not really about Christmas except for taking place at Christmas? These are all the sorts of questions that we don't really have to answer unless we feel like it, but it's an excuse to talk about 4 different movies, 2 of which were chosen to be centralized about Christmas movies. And for that, we selected A Christmas Story, which is right there in the title, and then Miracle on 34th Street. And then in the other corner, in this not a fight, we have 2 movies that are not essentially about Christmas, but do take place at Christmas, have a lot of Christmas trappings, and that, of course, is Die Hard and Love Actually. So, where do you think we should start?
Wow. I don't know. Do we want to discuss? Like, we probably don't want to discuss all 4 movies individually. Like that would not really be what we're trying to accomplish and would take forever.
Right. Yeah. Certainly we could do that, but we would probably want to keep it shorter compared to our episodes where we're only doing, say, 2 movies.
Right.
But yeah, I think we could also maybe just approach it from like the central conceit question instead of discussing each movie. Probably what we ought to do for each movie, at least briefly, is say, what's it about, just in case there's any of these movies that someone hasn't seen. Which is possible, right? People haven't seen movies all the time.
Yes.
That's an odd grammatical construction, but nonetheless, I think everyone understands what I mean. We should probably say what each is about and maybe just talk in general terms about our feelings about rewatching them. But then maybe instead of just doing an in-depth plot analysis for every single one, we then start talking about the relative Christmasness of each.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, how about then we can do them in chronological order? How about that? Which would certainly put Miracle on 34th Street first. Made in 1947. This is a story about the people who work at Macy's during Christmas in the 40s, and in particular, we have a woman who is responsible for a lot of the holiday decorations and the Macy's parade. And she encounters a man who claims to be the actual Santa Claus, and he ends up working for Macy's as their Santa Claus, but there's the whole, it becomes a whole thing of like he insists he really is, and there's back and forth, and it all culminates in a big court case where they're trying to determine whether or not he is, whether he should be committed or not. And so the big triumphant moment is when they decide to, the miracle, so to speak, is that the people who man the dead letter office at the post office heard about the court case where a guy claiming to be Santa Claus is on trial for whether he's crazy or not, decide to deliver all of the mail addressed to Santa Claus to the courthouse in a little bit of whimsy that comes at just the right moment for the court to go ahead and say, you know what? He says he's Santa Claus. Who are we to argue with the United States Post Office? But there's lots of other little ins and outs there. But it's certainly not merely about, it doesn't merely take place at Christmas. It's about Santa Claus, and in particular, staking a legal case for the existence of Santa Claus and, in fact, that it being this particular guy. I don't know about you, but I think this movie is a little soggy in the middle, but all of the beginning stuff and then all of the court case stuff, I think, is just charming as hell.
Yes. I mean, particularly the court case stuff. I mean, that it's just so much fun.
Yeah. It's, in particular, I think this movie really captures a perfect balance of never quite, like, the movie as a story never quite makes it definitive that this is, in fact, the real magic Santa Claus, right? Everything that happens in the story is something that theoretically could have been a coincidence, or could have just been that this is a particularly extraordinary guy, but not necessarily the guy who delivers presents all over the world on Christmas every year, right? It never quite pushes all the way there, but nonetheless is an extraordinary guy. And then the miracle in question, is it just a coincidence, a bit of whimsy on the behalf of the post office, or is it Christmas magic, right? And I really like how much fun this movie has with putting responsible, stern adults in positions of authority in the position of having to say in front of microphones and TV cameras that Santa isn't real, and them saying, I don't want to do that. Why? That sounds like that's a no-win scenario. So everybody kind of wants to hedge their bets without ever really saying that, because it would make everybody mad at them. And so that balance means that Kris Kringle, aka Santa Claus, wins the case. And I think that's, there's a lot of movies that have kind of magical realism, but I think that it's the rare film that captures the balance that this one does in kind of, never quite confirming it either way, but having it just be a really fun, well, what if he is the real Santa Claus? Also, just as a bit of trivia, notable that the little girl who pulls on his beard to see that it's real, the daughter of the female lead, is played by little 8-year-old Natalie Wood.
Yep.
So I don't know. That's probably enough for that initial summary. We'll talk more about details as we go, but so the next, what year was Die Hard? Was that 1984?
I thought it was a little later in the 80s, but...
Well, let's see. Die Hard is 1988. You're right. So that means the next one on the list chronologically is A Christmas Story.
Correct.
Which came out in 1983, which blows my mind every single time I realize that, again, because it feels in my brain like something that has not merely always existed, but never couldn't have not existed. I don't know. It feels like a staple in my brain. And so realizing that it it did not predate me, and in fact the memory I have in my head primarily for it now is the idea of it running as a 24-hour marathon on cable TV on Christmas, because I have so many memories of family holidays where we just have that running in the background and everybody else is doing everything, but it's just Christmas story all day. But I realized looking up the trivia that has actually only, that 1997 was the first year they did that. So it wouldn't have happened when I was a little kid. Now, certainly might have seen it as a little kid. I'm sure they showed it, but it wasn't the 24-hour marathon that they actually do on 2 different channels now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 2 channels, and they specifically program it in cooperation with each other so that they're an hour offset. So they're not starting it and stopping it at the same time.
That's pretty funny.
So
no, I agree with you, but I think there's a couple of things that lead into it, which I think,
Sure.
which will be part of our description of this, movie, I think, as well. Is, I mean, first of all, I mean, it came out when we were 5, so it's not like we have a ton of awareness of it, of the time before this movie existed.
Right.
To your point, of like it, even though it does not predate us, it predates our cognition of watching things, right? And it is set in the 50s, 60s.
Well, it's 40s actually, but there's a little bit of, like, if you get into, it doesn't really firmly establish a year, but like people have gone through to try to say, okay, well, there's references to Wizard of Oz, so it could only have been, it would have had to have been after that came out, but he gets the little Orphan Annie ring, and these are the years they did that and stuff like that, but 40s is when it would have been.
40s. Okay. So, I mean, but that also, it does a very good job of feeling not like an 80s movie, but like a 40s movie, right? Like,
yeah. So I really think you're onto something there, because I think part of what has created this feeling of, like, to call it timeless, it feels like an understatement. But I think what it is it's like the everlasting gobstopper of nostalgia. It is like 25 layers deep of nostalgia, because at least thinking about it now, it's a holiday classic from when we were kids, made by people who were making a movie based on the nostalgia of when they were kids. And in many respects, that story having been about, like, the timelessness of Christmas. Like, so even though it's like 2 generations back, I guess. Or no, I guess. Well, so let me think. Let's like count, right? Like, if we're the age of the, the adults in the movie now, more or less, and we were kids when Ralphie was a kid, right? In terms of when the movie came out, but then. It was actually being made by people, like, setting it in the 40s means it's actually like 2 back from then.
Yeah. Because a generation is essentially 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So for shorthand.
Right. So Gene Shepard, who is the writer and does the voiceover narration, was born in 1920. So, the point just being, he is writing a story set in the 40s that's based on his memories of being a kid in the 20s. And then that gets made into a movie in the 80s that we're talking about now in the 2020s. So I think all of those different layers are part of what gives it this weird elastic quality to it. But in any case, if anyone hasn't seen it, or if you've only seen it in bits and pieces, which I can totally understand, the basic premise is that we've got a kid Ralphie. He, more than anything, he wants a Red Ryder BB gun with a compass in the stock and a thing which tells time. Which I just love that he always calls it that because, of course, it's a sundial. I think when I was a kid, I assumed it was just like a clock, but it makes sense that in the 40s you probably wouldn't bother having a clock in a kid's red, BB gun. Why would you do that? It's a sundial. In any case, he wants that more than anything, but he keeps getting thwarted because he's supposed to be 9 in the movie, and that's pretty young for a BB gun, even in that time period, I think. But he has his various holiday-related adventures as he is trying to come up with ways to convince, first his mom, then his teacher, and then Santa himself to give him this BB gun. And I think it's a fun little bit of trivia to just realize that the one adult in his life that he doesn't ask is his dad. And of course, it's his dad that actually gets it for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's fun. But yeah, so he has various encounters with bullies and his friends and other just sort of ordinary kid misadventures. And that's it. But it is sort of it's very centrally, once again, about Christmas. He wants, his goal, his want is to get a certain gift for Christmas. It's all about preparing for Christmas. Everything is building to the Christmas morning, climax, right? So.
Yeah, and I think just again on your point about timelessness is it is crazy how like we've already said a million times, the movie set in the 40s that was made in the 80s captures themes that were still relevant. Like there's still a gift that some kids have their heart set on that whether it's dangerous like a BB gun or whether it's too expensive or it's a video game or something that their parents don't want to get them. Like there's always going to be some big gift that kids wish for that isn't necessarily guaranteed to be getting, and they're going to always try to plot for how they can earn it. Bullies exist, just like that. I mean, that part of the experience.
I'll maybe talk more about this later, but that the bullying stuff in this movie always really resonated with me as feeling pretty authentic in terms of what bullies and being bullied and all of that sort of thing feels like. In any case.
Okay, and then the experience with Santa and the sort of hyper realism that is with that makes it both exciting and terrifying at the same time. Like all of those things like still exist, and it's so I don't know, this movie just really did capture all of that in a weird way, and so it's always fun to rewatch it, but it remains a
right. Like I feel like I have no ability whatsoever to evaluate it critically because it's been part of my brain for as long as I can remember. So, in any case, let's go ahead and move on. And so, in 1988, would the next chronologically would be Die Hard. Do you want to take that one?
So this is focused on the spirit of Christmas. So Die Hard is, for anyone who hasn't seen it at this point, it's a movie that takes place around Christmas time. A New York police officer is going to LA where his recently separated, it's kind of a difficult scenario, wife has taken a high profile job, and he's visiting there for the Christmas party. And quote unquote terrorists take over this huge plaza building, which the only people it's being built. So there's already not a ton of tenants in it, but then so one of the main tenants is the company that she works for. Is it Nakatomi? Does she work for Nakatomi?
Nakatomi Plaza. Well, like her boss's name isn't Nakatomi, but
but works for the Nakatomi company who is running it.
I believe that's the case.
Yeah. So either way, these terrorists are take it over, take all the Christmas party guests hostages. when what the reality of what they're trying to do is that the Nakatomi Corporation holds a vault on the level where the Christmas party was that has tons of artifacts and things like that in there too. But what they're most interested in are the bonds, the untraceable bonds or whatever, the $600 million.
Bearer bonds, I think they are.
Bearer bonds.
Specifically
bearer
because
bonds. Yeah.
bearer bonds means like you hold it, it's yours. It doesn't
right.
have
Anyone
any
can
other...
exchange it. Right. Yeah. It has no owner other than the person who possesses it. Right. It's essentially cash, just done in a different way. Right. Yeah. And so there's $600 million in there. So that what they really are just high class or high level bank robbers. Not high. I guess they are kind of classy, except for the killing people part.
Yeah.
And so anyway, our New York police detective manages to evade becoming captive in the hostage scenario, and then proceeds to terrorize the terrorists by combating them throughout this building with all the intricacies that go along with the police involvement, how to get the police there, the FBI coming in, some double crosses with the FBI setting up things to kill the terrorists setting up things to kill the hostages, ultimately resulting in our hero having to have a showdown in the vault with Alan Rickman, who is the very
not really in the vault, but no, I don't. It's a minor detail.
Well, I thought they were in the vault.
No, because when they have their face to face,
yeah.
they're on the upper level, not just below the roof, because Hans is inspecting the explosives.
No, I'm speaking. I had cut to the end.
Oh, okay.
Where he has her hostage. That's right outside the vault, if not in the vault. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe. I think the location of the vault is frankly a little bit unclear in the floor plan of the building. But in any case, that it's close enough.
Yes. In any case, yeah, I was saying there's a showdown at the end. Alan Rickman, and we'll get into all this, but Alan Rickman is a phenomenal villain. I mean, he's one of the greatest villains. Yeah, as Hans Gruber in this movie. But I try to really shorthand the plot there.
Sure. So. Yeah. I think, this is another one that is kind of such an established classic that, almost anything that could be said about it has been said already. It's considered one of the best, action movies. I think it's kind of fascinating to look back now and realize that at the time of casting Bruce Willis, people were like, really? Bruce Willis? Doesn't he do comedies and stuff? And so the idea that this was his first action movie is kind of fun just to think about now. And of course, Alan Rickman, who's in Love Actually too, which was kind of made me amused when I realized it. But he's an incredible villain as Hans Gruber, and there's just so much to like in it. But in terms of its Christmassy nature, right? Like, it's certainly taking place not merely at Christmas, but specifically a Christmas party. There's decorations all over the place. There's lots of Christmas music on the soundtrack, right? Like even when it's non-diegetic, meaning like it's not like they're playing Christmas music at the party, but it's in the movie's score, have Christmas type music and, other various references in there. Now I have a machine gun, ho, ho, ho.
Yep. The Santa hat on the dead body.
Yep.
The end credits play to Let It Snow. There's even a non-traditional Christmas song. There's a Run DMC rap song called Christmas in Hollis that plays in the limo as he's arriving to the party. So lots of fun things like that.
Nice. All right. So last but not least in terms of our chronological rundown is Love Actually. You want to take that one too?
Yeah, I was trying to think how you describe this one in a short overview. It's essentially a lot of different, very sugary love stories, all woven together into one movie. The overall point is meant to be that there are lots of different ways to find love stories and lots of different types of love stories
Mm-hmm.
and lots of different ways to love people. Which, obviously, like, looking back, it only focuses on normal hetero relationships, which there's a ton of things. And that's what something I don't really know if we want to get into all that. This movie is an easy movie to really like pick apart and like,
Yeah, well,
down. But at some point, like, part of the fun of it is just letting go and just saying, you know what, let's just have fun with what it is, right?
I was really thinking about this because I think I mentioned when we were choosing the movies at the end of the last episode, I mentioned not thinking about this movie as one that I especially enjoyed and was not necessarily looking forward to rewatching, but certainly in the interest of our discussion. But so from that perspective, like rewatching it, like the things that bothered me, like they don't not bother me now, but this movie does have something that it's like the analogy I came up with is terrible, but it's like drinking strawberry daiquiris in the sense that like it's so sweet going down moment to moment that you're having a good time and it's only later that you regret everything.
Yeah. It's fair. Yeah.
The thing is, I think what this movie has that are unambiguous successes that are what I think is like the primary reasons this movie is so beloved amongst the people who love it is, first of all, incredible cast, right? It's a huge ensemble cast with charming, attractive people being nice, more or less. That's a huge plus, right? Like there's just that all, that makes a big difference.
To your point, even the two like tangential affair relationships, mm-hmm. like they're, one is obviously Alan Rickman and his secretary, and he doesn't do anything with.
Well,
but even by the end of that, like it ends up being kind of like, he like refines his love for his wife, and like, I mean, it's like they're just because people they're just all being nice.
I think that is such a perfect illustration. We won't do all of this now, but I think that particular moment is such a perfect example of something that starts to fall apart immediately as soon as you try to interrogate the slightest little detail about it. Yes. Like, for example, did he sleep with his secretary at any point or not? Because we don't see it, but he certainly acts like they did. She was going after him pretty aggressively, and he's buying her a fancy piece of jewelry. Do you do that for your secretary that you're only kind of maybe thinking about doing something with? When she's already throwing herself at you? I don't know. Yeah.
In the moment of the movie, though, it feels like he's so infatuated that he's basically cheating in his mind, which is still cheating, but then obviously the only other affair tangential one is the best friend who's in love with Keira Knightley. And even that one is super sweet too, because he doesn't,
Yes and no. Like it's one of
again, yes, of course you can pick it apart.
Right. No, but like that's another perfect illustration of one of kind of what I'm talking about, that like this movie makes me feel drunk because in the moment it seems reasonable. And then later I'm thinking about, wait a minute. No way. No way.
Yeah. So wait, he was a jerk to her. Yeah, he's a jerk to her the entire time she knows him.
Except that he's also being a super creep by videotaping only her face during her wedding and reception.
She finds super sweet. None of that in reality would ever happen. I know, I get it.
And then declaring his love for her in a way that's like, I know you're married to my best friend, and so I'm not trying to mess that up, but I think you're amazing, but I'm going to tell you in a way that makes you have to keep a secret from him because I'm being super creepy about it. and is like, certainly if he knew I was doing this, he would be mad, right? So now you have to decide whether to let him be mad at his best friend or keep a secret, like talking about so the point being, but like when I was watching it, like during the runtime of the movie, when I was watching it, it's like, but then it's only later when you go, wait a minute. And I think there's a lot of stuff like that in this movie, but this is where I come back to the second thing that I think the movie does incredibly well, which I think is what produces this strange intoxication effect that the movie has, I think, which is that the editing is incredible because it's taking like 9 different stories that are all about as deep as a greeting card. And it's intercutting. It's not like an anthology where it's one after the other. They are all intercut together over the whole movie, constantly cutting from one to the next, to the next, and the next. And all of these different stories. And yet the movie manages to put all of this together in a way where it doesn't ever feel like a jarring tone shift. It doesn't ever feel weird that we're switching from one to another. We're never left in a moment so long that we're tired and we're impatient to get to someone else. But every time we do switch, it's never a situation where we feel like, oh, wait, but I wanted... It just works, which is frankly like a magic trick. Like, that's a pretty incredible editing accomplishment, I think.
Yes, I agree. And I love your point about it being as deep as a green card. Like, I always think about this movie. So it opens and closes with real shots of people greeting loved ones at an airport. Mm-hmm. And what this movie feels like to me is what you could come up with if you just sat at an airport and watched like 10 people greet each other. Mm-hmm. And we're like, oh, I wonder what the backstory is. And because that's like the depth of how much has been created, right? Is like what you could just sit there and think of, right?
But even as a counterpoint to that, all of the people we see greeting each other in that sequence are like family members greeting each other. But then all of the stories are more like specifically romantic love. And in fact, most of those are about unrequited romantic love. Or rather, unrequited only because our main character doesn't have the courage to actually do anything about it. It's like every time they actually take the step, they are rewarded for it. We got the little kid, we got Andrew Lincoln, we got Laura Linney, we got everyone who is just pining. So we have the woman, Laura Linney's character, who's working at this office that she doesn't like. The only reason she's working there is because she's got a crush on this guy that she hasn't even spoken to despite working in the office with him for 2 years. What? In any case, we're spending a lot more time already on this movie, but I want to be clear, like when I say this, that like you admitted it as much, like in your introduction, if you want to find stuff to find fault in Love Actually, it has a lot. Yes. A lot. It honestly, I think the beating heart of this movie is actually pretty cynical when you start drilling down into the stories. But the overall effect of watching the movie is just this sort of warm, fuzzy blanket of softness. And just like, look, Hugh Grant's dancing. Yay. Oh, Martin Freeman, I like him. And there's Bill Nighy being silly. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what the movie feels like when you're watching. So... So I get what there is to like about it, even though I think overall I can't ignore some of the faults that it has.
I 100% agree, and that's why I told you, like mm-hmm. You can't even get through the description without even calling it out, because the whole point of the movie is there's lots of different types of love. But there's the one interracial couple, and even the black guy in that couple is a very, very minor character, right? Mm-hmm. Like, he has not a whole lot to do with this.
Well, and they are not actually the primary romantic pairing of the storyline.
No, yeah, it's, it's so when you even just say it out loud, you're like, God, like, I yes, it is telling a story of a lot of different love stories and a lot of different types of love, but it's certainly leaving a lot out.
Yeah. Well, and then some of them are just like the whole Martin Freeman one. Like, we like the chemistry that those two actors have with each other, but their story, this job that they have, makes no sense and is in there. Like, the director has admitted. So, in case anyone hasn't seen the movie, presumably what they are doing is being stand-ins for the famous actors that are going to make a movie, only it's a sex scene. So they're having to do stand-ins for the sex scene so that they can do lighting and stuff like that. But that stand-in work requires her to actually have her shirt and bra off, and for him to be fondling her breast as part of the lighting test. That's not how that works. But and so the whole joke, the conceit of the story is that they're having to do all of these sexy things even as they are at the most beginning early levels of just being a little bit flirty and friendly with each other, and then later they actually decide to go on a date, and it's funny because they've already done all of these sexy seeming things, but it was just work. And yeah, okay, that's kind of funny, except that it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, and that's also another one where they do a couple of things to try to quote unquote like weave the stories together, like having people at weddings or something with each other, and it's like, in what universe do those two people know anybody else in the story? Like, I mean, like, some of them make more sense. Like, Hugh Grant, assistant's kid goes to the same school as his sister's kid, which even that one's a little bit of a stretch. Like, I'm pretty sure the prime minister's like sister's kid probably doesn't go to a place where somebody from the dodgy end of the street is going.
But also by coincidence,
it kind of makes sense. Yeah.
By coincidence, it's also the same school where
oh yeah, it's also where Liam Neeson's kid goes to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's where Liam Neeson's kid goes. And isn't Emma Thompson his sister?
She's Hugh Grant's sister. Yeah,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, so
that's what I was saying. The prime minister's sister goes to the same school as his assistant.
Right, but so Emma Thompson's kids are also there to be in the same performance. But it's a coincidence that he ends up at the performance of his nieces and nephews because he's actually there to pursue a romantic relationship with his assistant. So, which it's like they were trying to connect all of these little dots so that they could get as many people in the same place, and they ended up with a couple of them doubled up, like double reasons for them to be there. And it's kind of funny that the more legitimate one is actually not the one that is the stated purpose, right? Like, what if he hadn't gone to look for her, but instead ran into her there because he was there to see his niece and nephew? Oh, it's not the point because we could also pick apart that storyline because all of them have got an issue.
Then you wouldn't have the funny scene of them like trying to talk over the octopus kid and also running out of time. I mean, it's a funny scene.
And them finally kissing just as the backdrop lifts up. Yeah, there's great stuff. It's so like.
That car ride scene is hilarious because they get in and he goes, how far is it? She's like, oh, it's just around the corner. And then he launches into this speech talking over the octopus kid. Mm-hmm. And then halfway through his speech, they arrive and the kid just starts getting out. He's like, oh, it literally was just around the corner. Yeah. Like, I mean, it's just such a funny that you can't even be mad about how stupid the premise was.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there's an awful lot about this movie that, like, this movie just skates by on charm, the charm of the cast and the ability of the editing to misdirect us away from anything that we would have questions about until the movie's over, and then we have the questions. But while we're watching, it keeps us distracted. I think the one sequence though that just like I can't believe it every single time is the one about the British guy who's going to go to America to get a girlfriend because Americans like British accents. And the joke in the movie is that it actually 100% works. He gets a hot girlfriend and her friend to come back to Britain. So that it's not only his hot girlfriend, but a hot girl for his other friend that didn't believe him that was going to work. And that just happens. That is the truth in the movie. Like, it seems every time like the joke is going to be that he is, of course, stupid for thinking that that's true. And then the joke is on us because it actually works.
I know there's a lot to pick apart, but it's too much fun when you're watching it because you love it.
So we've gotten into that already in more detail than any of the others, but that's okay. But let's talk about what's Christmassy about it, right? Obviously, takes place near Christmas. We talked about there being the big Christmas play or something that apparently actually takes place on Christmas Eve, that everyone's going to, that also like, the girl that the little kid is excited to pledge his love to is also not merely appearing in this production, but then going straight to the international airport to move to another country on Christmas Eve. The timeline of this movie is all over the place, which I think is what confuses a lot of the other pieces. But in any case, though, what else is Christmas about it? I'm sincerely asking, not trying to imply there's not anything.
I mean, there's numerous Christmas parties outside of just the one that you're talking about, the performance. Mm-hmm. There is a weird theme about how on Christmas you tell the truth.
Yeah,
which I didn't know was a thing. I've never heard
that. I'm glad that you
said
it that way because I was going to ask that question because I was like, is that a British thing? I don't know, because every time when it's like, because it's Christmas and on Christmas you tell the truth, and I'm like, do you though? Like, I've never heard of that. I think if anything, Christmas is the time that everyone kind of says, okay, let's all we can set the truth up on a shelf for a little while and have good time with each other before we.
I think that's almost the more Christmassy part of this movie is that it's like, it is exactly that. It's like, let's just shelve all the things that we could pick apart and let's just be cheery and have fun. Like that in and of itself is almost Christmassy in this movie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I agree. There is the whole bit with Bill Nighy's character where he's covering what I guess is supposed to be his song in the fiction of the movie, although it's actually a real song. And he's instead of it being love is all around, it's Christmas is all around. And he is right up front, even as we see him recording it, that he thinks that the whole enterprise is colossally stupid and he never takes it seriously all the way through. Actually, I think that might be my favorite of the storylines, though. Maybe particularly because it is one of the ones that's not just another unrequited romantic partnership that only exists because they didn't talk to each other for a long time and then they did. But his whole thing with his manager's trying to make this a big hit, to make some money for this guy who's not actually produced a lot of new material in a long time. And he's not taking it seriously. But then when it becomes a big hit, he gets invited to Elton John's party and his manager is going to go home by himself. But then he decides to bail on Elton John's party and come hang out with his manager because when on Christmas, you're supposed to be with the people that you love. And I thought that was really nice. And it's made just a little bit weird by the fact that what they want to do together apparently is get drunk and watch porn together late at night on Christmas Eve. These two supposedly hetero guys that are longtime friends are going to get drunk and watch porn together. All right. I guess.
I mean, yeah, that part of it's all weird, and
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's
So, in any case, though, but like that's obviously Christmas themed. The whole point being that you know, it is a little bit of a satire on like commercialization of Christmas stuff. You know what I mean? Just appropriating Christmas to, you know, be just a shiny bow on an old thing. You know, it's pretty cynical, honestly. Like, but like in a way that I think is really in keeping with a lot of the stories in here. At the same time, like I don't know, it's weird. This movie is kind of simultaneously romantic and cynical in weird ways. Like I don't in any case. But let's see what else is. I think we kind of covered the main Christmas pieces of it, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we raced through and we did at least the high level discussion. I think we talked Love Actually a bit more in detail than the others so far. So let's maybe let's recap like the Christmassy aspects of each, right? So oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm just proposing. We've got a freewheeling sort of format here that we didn't really settle in advance. But like, so let's talk about various Christmas elements, perhaps. How about that? Santa Claus, right? So when in Miracle on 34th Street, obviously the whole thing is Santa specific, right? Like Santa is the Christmas in that movie, right? Like it's set at Christmas, there's Christmas shopping, but the whole thing is focused on Santa Claus, right? And his existence or not, and you know, this guy being like Santa, but is he really Santa? What does that even mean? All of that sort of thing, right? So like he's like Santa is the focal point, even more so than Christmas itself, right? In Miracle on 34th Street. Which is a little bit interesting, actually, now that I think about it, because it really is more a Santa Claus movie than a Christmas movie. It's being, you know, Santa Claus is inherently associated with Christmas, so that's what makes it a Christmas movie. But it really is more about the person or the myth than the holiday, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's interesting about it, like we talked a little bit about the idea of balancing, like the perspective of the movie on, like, well, is he really Santa or not? Right? And the idea of, like, building that into, you know, faith, right? Like this idea of, well, we have the main character played by Maureen O'Hara, and she is like atheist, very, you know, straightforward. She doesn't believe in any of this nonsense, and she has taught her daughter as well to not believe in these things. But then she just keeps finding that she's not able to prove that he is not who he says he is. You know, like she finally, like she starts, when she finally starts to realize that, oh wait, no, he is saying that he really is. She goes and pulls up like what he filled out in his employment record, and it says like, you know, where do you live? North Pole. You know, how old are you? And it says, as old as my tongue and a little bit older than my teeth, which is amazing. Next of kin, he lists the reindeer.
Yeah.
So like that's all very silly, but just this idea of like like thematically it's about faith, right? In this idea of something that you can't prove but that you kind of decide to believe in anyway, you know.
Right.
So I think that that's kind of thematically what is going on in Miracle on 34th Street. And then you compare that to, you know, A Christmas Story, which is lovely, but is really very much more about, at least from Ralphie's perspective, it's very commercial, like, oh, I want presents, I want to get the presents that I want, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get them. And like his take on Santa is very, I don't want to quite say mercenary, but it's interesting because as a character, Ralphie clearly believes in Santa, but it is that just starting to be old enough to start thinking through some aspects of it. Like, for example, he seemed pretty determined that the department store Santa that he waits in line for must be really Santa. But the Santa that's in the parade, no, I'm impatient because I'm going to go to the real Santa at the department store.
Right.
So it's interesting to kind of make those, like to start watching the maturing brain start to make those sorts of distinctions, right? Because in the movie, his little brother, Randy, right? Randy is his brother.
Yeah, Randy's little brother. Yeah.
He is excited when he see in the parade. He's saying, "There's Santa! Yay, Santa!" So he's not making any distinction about this Santa versus that Santa. Whereas Ralphie is, but still very much believing, no, I'm waiting in line. This is the guy. Because I think that it's true that a lot of kids, when they start getting to that age, might get to a point where they say, oh, well, the Santa in the groceries or in the grocery store or on the street corner in the department store is not the real Santa, but they work for him. That's right. Why you can tell them what you want, because they have the direct line to the real Santa. And that all makes logical sense to, a 7-year-old. Right. But I think some of that's really interesting. I actually kind of want to talk a little bit more about that. But let's so in Die Hard, we kind of evoke Santa with the whole Santa hat on the dead guy. Now I have a machine gun, ho ho ho. But that's kind of really the only Santa bits, I think.
Yeah.
In there, right? There's not really any other, Santa references or anything that's kind of like that, right? It's just kind of the trappings a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Santa hats, Santa in the rap song, like, yeah, that kind of stuff. Like nothing, but no overt like Santa. No.
Right. And then I think Love Actually, I'm not sure has anything that I can think of. Do people, like maybe someone's in a Santa hat at some point, but I don't even really remember that.
I was gonna say the secretary, but no, she's what I was thinking of was probably the devil horns, which is very not a Santa hat. Yeah.
So to the point, at least, that if there is any, it's not memorable.
No.
Yeah. So I think that's, I don't know if it's interesting, but we're just kind of tracking these signifiers, right? I want to touch base on Santa just a little bit more too, though, just because I think it is, what with Ralphie just starting to get to that age where maybe he's asking some questions in his own mind about the whole thing, and then the whole question of is Santa real in Miracle on 34th Street. I really remember I don't remember ever really being confused about it, but I remember having a conversation with my mom where she made the case that Santa is real in the sense that, we talk about mythological figures that are they're real in the sense that they can have an influence on us, right? You hear a story about them and it moves you and it maybe inspires you to do things differently than you would. And it's part of the emotional truth, the reality of what the holiday means and all of that sort of thing, without necessarily having to correlate to factual things that you could put your hands on. And I remember that softening the blow quite a bit, at least for me. But I don't even, I've heard people say that they felt betrayed you know, like when they learn the truth or something. But I don't know if I've ever encountered someone that actually felt that way.
I never felt that way. Like for me, it was just sort of an evolving, like, there was, you started to have more and more kids at school be like, well, you don't still believe in that, right? Like it's not
Yeah.
true. And then you argue with them. And,
Mm-hmm.
but then you kind of start to think, like you said, like your point, your maturing brain starts to say like, yeah,
Some of it does start to feel implausible the
yeah,
more you
it's like,
learn about the world.
yeah, that would have to be very, very magical. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, this would be like the only thing in my life that would be that magical currently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like even if you still have faith in your religion and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
those aren't overt magical things happening every year, right? Like there's a different faith base in that, right? Like
Right.
so it becomes the only thing that's like that. Well, I mean, and then the Easter Bunny, and it's like all these things, just like they
Yeah.
seem, yeah. And so you start to kind of like realize this probably isn't the case, but I look back at it as like it's one of those like, don't be sad because it's over, be happy that it happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't overtly think like that as a kid, but like I feel like that's how I left with it.
Right. Well,
Was I was
like
almost glad that my parents did that and that I was left with that feeling and that joy that I didn't feel betrayed. I felt like thank you for giving me that, right? Like
mm-hmm.
that was fun.
Yeah, like Santa is a story, but he's a good story. It's a story that you're glad you heard, and you're glad you were told. You know, like
Yeah.
um, this actually just ties back into. So I don't know if we maybe
Shut these blinds real quick. I mean, I
okay,
can hear you.
sure.
I'm just going like right over there. Yeah.
I'm just like at this point, I feel like might as well just make this kind of a freewheeling sort of conversation. I don't have any sort of specific structure in mind, but like want to circle back to. I think one of the things that makes a Christmas story so enduring is that clarity of tone that Gene Shepherd has when writing about, kids, because it's clearly writing about being a kid from the perspective of an adult, which is why it's so critical that we have the adult Ralphie ostensibly giving us this voiceover narration, right? And it's why they kind of, like, he had been writing a bunch of books like this and doing, other public performances where he did reading of his own work and everything. And so, like, he clearly had, he had a firm hold on that, being able to set that kind of mood. But it feels really kind of authentic in a way that a lot of things about kids don't, right? And I think part of that, especially watching it now, like first of all, I think watching it now, we can appreciate that there's a lot more going on with the mom and the dad than you picked up on when you're a kid watching this movie, right?
Yeah.
Um, when you're a kid, it's kind of like, yeah, they're up there mostly as like obstacles or assets for Ralphie to interact with. But then you watch as an adult and you're like, oh yeah, they've got their own little stuff going on in there. And the looks and stuff, like the bit where Ralphie has said the bad word and has to sit with soap in his mouth, and then after he's finally excused, the mom is just like, gets curious, and she puts the soap in her mouth just for a minute, just because, like, what am I doing to this kid? It's like, how bad is this? Huh? Ugh. So just this little moment of all these little grace notes for the parents, but specifically the bit about the bullying. What I liked about it, the depiction of it in this, that feels a lot more authentic than most bullying in movies dealing with kids of this age, is the chronic nature of it, meaning it's not just one or two heightened encounters. It is just a day-to-day reality of like, nope, it's just like part of your every single day is, well, have to try to see if we can get down the block today without being hassled. The nature of like, there's never any question of any other adult helping out with the situation anyway. And also, just frankly, even when he finally kind of snaps and there's a fight, his reaction upon his dramatic victory is to just burst into tears. Because, you know, he doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want any of this. It's just sort of like, you know, the triumphant victory where, you know, the Back to the Future style where, you know, Crispin Glover finally lays out Biff and it's great and he knocks him out with one punch and he's like, ah. Like, that's almost never what really happens.
Oh.
You know, even though Ralphie pretty unambiguously wins this fight, which I think is maybe not the most common outcome with standing up to a bully, but nonetheless, just, you know, it comes from, adrenaline and emotional trauma, and so the result afterwards is not a feeling of victory, but more like the dam breaking a little bit.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why he wins the fight, which I think thematically is important, is that no one's ever stood up to the bully. So he's never actually been fought.
Yeah.
He didn't know what to do either, right?
Yeah, he goes down immediately.
Yeah, and his little henchman or whatever, the friend or whatever, is like doesn't even help him because he doesn't know what to do. Like
there's just this moment of shock of like, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah, their whole premise is based on people not doing that, right?
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite little grace notes, honestly, in that whole sequence is Randy's heroic saving the glasses. You know, the glasses have fallen off and Ralphie's doing his thing. And then Randy there's this insert shot of Randy just carefully picking up the glasses and getting them to safety. Just helping out in the ways that he can as a little kid. And I think that's just such a sweet little detail in that sequence.
Yeah. It just as a narrative though, it helps, it builds the tension for when he ultimately steps on his glasses later and like how big of a deal that feels like, right? Because we've had this one time where he thought he didn't have his glasses and his dad thought he didn't have his glasses, and like there's a little bit of tension there, and then it's relieved, and then you get to the other part, and so
yeah, and there's just all the little details that overlap, like the language being a kind of a motif almost throughout the movie, because on the one hand, it's established that his dad curses constantly.
Yes.
And I love that the movie's version of this is to just have him shouting gibberish. I think that's amazing. The implication being, no, like the gibberish we're hearing is not what really happened. It is our narrator, you know, sanitizing it for our behalf, you know? But then when Ralphie, you know, says the word and his mom is like, where did you hear that? And there's actually a moment where, like, as a narrator, he's like, from my dad. He says it all the time. What are you talking about? But he's too afraid to say that. So he rats on his friend, which isn't even true. And then his Flick gets in trouble over the phone. I think that's such a funny moment, I think, where you're hearing the other side of the phone conversation where Flick's mom,
and his mom gets so uncomfortable.
Like,
that she has to like put the phone down.
And he's like, oh. But then, of course, what we also get during the fight is not merely that the fight's happening, but where it turns awkward again, because now Ralphie is repeating the exact same kind of gibberish ranting that we heard from his dad earlier. And that's where the point where, like, even his friends who are cheering him on start to go, whoa, okay, woo, yikes. And then, like, his mom is coming, they're trying to stop him, but he's just doing it. And then that leads to that whole moment where he's worried now he's going to get in trouble, not just for fighting, but also for all of the things that he said afterwards. And then his mom just totally, like, you know, doesn't, you know, tells the dad about the fight, but not about any of the rest of it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's like a really great moment though, where she's just like, she understands like, hey, he stood up to the bully and nobody.
Yeah. She's proud of him, you know?
Yeah, she's proud of him. But so she doesn't want him to, like, she doesn't want to go to him and be like, yeah, good job kicking that guy's butt.
Right, yeah, like she doesn't want to reward him or say like good job fighting. She doesn't want to like reinforce that exactly, but at the same time, she recognizes this was an extreme situation and you took the action you needed to, and I'm going to let some of those other details slide because
and she doesn't lie about it. Like she tells his dad that he got into a fight, and she sort of dismisses it as, well, how boys are. Oh, and I see the Packers are playing the Bears.
Yeah.
Well, gets him all riled up.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like the movie does occasionally in some spots kind of imply that the old man, because he's never like given, like neither parent is given like an actual name in the movie. Although apparently when he receives the telegram saying that he's gaining a major award, the telegram does say that his name is Frank, but he's never referred to it as that in any other place. He is the old man. But it depicts him occasionally as being a little bit less involved in the day-to-day. It's almost the classic, 50s trope, right? Of the mom does most of the detail work, but then, tells the dad if it's important, that sort of thing. But then again, it's also, as we established, it's the dad that knows exactly what he wants and gets it for him at the end.
Yep.
So even though there's an apparent lack of attention going on in some of the earlier scenes, it's revealed with that final gift that he really was paying attention all along. And I think that's really sweet.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's super sweet.
Even though it gets him the dangerous gun that he really does almost shoot his eye out. It would have, if not for the glasses. That remains, I think, one of the greatest moments in the movie. I think just the fact that after all of these frustrating warnings early on, he really almost shoots his eye out with the very first shot.
That one, one of my other just oddly like favorite moments of the movie is when he decodes the secret phrase, and he's so angry that it's just a commercial for Ovaltine. Because it just like that, it's another one of those like almost like coming of age type things where like, had he been like 2 years younger, it wouldn't have felt like that to him, right? It would have been like, oh, got to drink my Ovaltine, or Orphan Annie says, but like he's coming into this realization of like, wait, like all this is nonsense. Like they're just advertising to me, and I don't know. There's something just fun, weirdly, about like seeing that to your point earlier about like that sort of maturation process that kids go through. Like it really hits a lot of those kind of things. Yeah. And I don't know, that was always felt like such a great moment to me, to the point where sometimes I conflate in my mind, like where he swears, like I sometimes think that that's where it happens. Yeah. He reads that and he's like, says something like F this, like, or whatever. And I know that's not how it actually goes down in the movie, obviously, but I conflate those things.
Yeah. For anyone who hasn't watched it recently, the swear actually comes when he's helping the old man change a tire after they've bought the Christmas tree. And it comes from a fairly easy to happen accident where Ralphie is holding the hubcap full of lug nuts, but he's standing a little bit too close and it gets knocked out of his hands and all the lug nuts go flying. And that's when on camera we see little Peter Billingsley go, "Oh, fudge." And then the narrator says,
"But I didn't say fudge." Which it was funny. We were actually outside of this movie, just as a real quick aside, we were talking about this at a Christmas party last week because some friends of ours, their kid swore. And we were discussing like, but he swore in a way that was like totally appropriate for if you were someone who swears, right? Like the situation in which he swore, it made sense. And it's like, yes, you have to punish the kid, but are you are you almost proud that they at least used it correctly in context?
Yeah,
That was the discussion that we had. Yeah.
Swearing is one of those rules that is so nuanced, because on the one hand, there's time and place, right? There's nuances in society of when it is or is not appropriate to use swear words, right? And the biggest issue with a kid is that they don't have much sense of propriety, and therefore don't necessarily understand what are the good or bad times. And so it's just as easy to say, well, explaining the nuance of how to read the room and know who you're talking to and what is the appropriate situation where it might be okay versus when it's not. It's easier to just say, no, just don't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Well,
think.
because the point is, in this movie, that is a totally appropriate place to use that word. Like, as an adult, if I was holding a hubcap full of lug nuts and helping my friend or whoever out, and I knocked and lost it, like
spilling all the lug nuts into the snow on the side of the dark highway, like that sucks.
Yeah,
That's
I'd probably say that.
Yeah.
I'd probably say that, and it would be appropriate. Yeah. And so that was the thing. These parents had caught their kid, and he didn't even say it to them. He said it on his own. They just heard him say it.
Right.
And it was like, but it was a totally appropriate use of the swear word. And so that was a discussion. It's like, yeah, he needs to be in trouble, but good job, like using it correctly.
Yeah, but like at the same time, the heartbreak of the moment when his dad makes him go back and get in the car. He was helping for the first time, and then he messed it up so bad that his dad made him go back into the car.
Yep, he doesn't get to help anymore.
Oh, your heart just breaks for this little kid in that moment. I think ultimately, we were talking a little bit about themes earlier. So from looking at Ralphie's story just from his perspective, you could say it's pretty materialistic, right? Like he's not aware of much of anything else that's happening other than he's trying to get, navigate his day-to-day kid life and get the present that he wants, right? And he's not really old enough to have much awareness of any of the rest of it. But the movie's perspective is not Ralphie the kid's perspective. It is grown-up Ralphie remembering it all, right? And so I think it ties into that whole nostalgia. Like that's another layer even that we were talking about, that like even within the movie itself is framed as a grown-up remembering when he was a kid.
Right.
And so like that's, I think the theme is kind of remembering the good times with all of the little sprinklings of the details that seemed so important at the time, but overall just kind of become seasoning in the overall soup of good memories, and I think like the tragic loss of the turkey, but then that leads to Christmas at the Chinese restaurant with, some depictions of Chinese waiters that we would do differently today. I think in the grand scheme of things, it's a relatively minor, but it is also just one of those things where you go, oh yeah, that part.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's kind of thematically in that sense, when we come back to the whole Christmas of it, is just remembering fondly like the experience of Christmas being this special magical time of year where you think about things that are different than what your normal day-to-day life. You have these higher things, these higher thoughts and feelings about things that are above what you normally think about. It's not just dealing with Scut Farkas, what a name there. But that's an everyday thing, or having to write a theme, or which I guess is like a 5-paragraph essay. We don't really call them themes anymore, but just any of that sort of thing. But just this idea of, it's a special time, and it, involves memories that you make with family that you can think back on later.
Yep.
Hmm.
No, I agree. I think that is the ultimate Christmas theme of this movie is like you could almost say that this story doesn't necessarily actually take place all over one Christmas, right? Like this could be 3 or 4 Christmas seasons that he's just remembered into one.
I
Like I
just
know it doesn't
remembered that I
say
had
that.
the posters that I could show on the screen here.
And I'm not saying that's what's happening, but like that's how well done this is that you could think of it like that, right? That
Yeah.
this is so.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Christmas themes in Die Hard, because I think there are some. Like we talked a little bit about like the story element, and it's mostly just kind of trappings. Like it takes place at a Christmas party. There's a Santa hat at some point. There's Christmas music. But I think also that like a big part of the plot for John McClane, here I'm trying to line this up, is of course, as you mentioned when you were initially describing it, that his current marriage situation is very much in the it's complicated area, right? Because they are kind of de facto separated, but it sounds like they didn't really ever quite talk about it that way. Like, I believe
They're not divorced, right?
right. They're not divorced, and it doesn't even really sound like they're they're officially separated so much as she took a job across the country and now she lives there, without it really have ever been having a conversation about them being separated. Like, it doesn't seem like they were separated before she moved. It sounds like it was maybe a bit more like they were having some trouble maybe, and then she got this job offer that would have her move across the country, and she took it. And so now they're separated just kind of by that, but the fact that she took it, even though it meant moving, and that she moved the kids with her, and he didn't go with her, seems like maybe that's the actual problem, right? Like there was maybe other things before that, but that was kind of what happened, right? Is that like
Right.
she took this great new job and moved across the country, and he decided not to go with her. And it like they don't really ever get into the history of it, except that those are the facts on the ground, right? But it's Christmas time, and so he is coming to visit, and there's some awkwardness that I think feels really very realistic about where are you staying? He doesn't want to presume that he's staying there, but she's also kind of saying the kids would love to have you at the house, but we'll make up the spare bedroom. And it still feels weird, right? Like he's not presuming. He talks about like, my old buddy lives in Pomona, which I didn't look up what the actual drive is, but it's probably, significant.
Well, it's also the premise for why the limo driver remains in the building is
right,
because
he doesn't know where he's going to stay, right?
right, he doesn't know if he's going to need a ride somewhere else or not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Although, at the same time, it does feel a little bit like if you've got the limo driver waiting, at the same time, like you could just get a taxi if you need one. But anyway, that's not important.
it's not important. We needed a construct to keep the limo in the garage.
But then there's also some stuff that they don't really get into too much detail beyond. Like there's a lot. I think that this movie does a lot with having facts do the talking around the edges of the complex emotions, right? Because he arrives at the place to see her and discovers that she's going by her maiden name, not her married name.
Right.
which is definitely like a signal. But then what she says later is that it's actually a complicated thing with the office politics, and her boss is Japanese, and so they would think that if she's married, then that means that she's not committed. Which, frankly, you think about that today, and you say that's not okay. The idea that her job prospects would be limited if they knew she was married, but you know, and at the same time, we have no way to know for sure how much that's true and how much it is that she really did kind of want to just try
and
on
use that
being
as
single
the
again. Rationalization, you know.
Yep.
And there's, I think, a great, like, there's a lot of careful work going on in that scene where they're alone together for the first time. You know, because they meet up where he's like meeting Ellis and the boss almost before he sees her again. But then when they're finally together again, you see them starting to spin up into old patterns of arguments, where they both kind of say some mean things to each other, and then she leaves to go finish what she's doing. And there's a moment again where like there's no dialogue but you just, I think he actually does say something like real mature, but like he kind of bonks his head against the wall, and it's very clear that the implication is being like, what are you doing? You're not here coming. You didn't come here to fight some more. What am I doing? You know, and he's sort of just kicking himself, or like, how am I letting this be the way this is going? And you know, that all of that kind of just feels, I think it's one of the things that makes the movie endure, right? Is that even though that stuff is, you could see it as being like, well, the movie is the action part, dealing with the bad guys and running around in the building and shooting and stepping on glass and all of that stuff. But taking the time to really establish that how he feels about her, and establish her as a character in her own right, gives everything with her later so much more in the way of stakes, right? Because once they're separated again, like, I don't think they see each other again until the end, right? After that argument.
No.
Yeah, because he's still in there kind of cleaning himself up when the terrorists break in, you know, the terrorists, finger quotes. And it's because he was kind of off in the private bathroom that he's able to get away. So it's only at the very end that they actually meet up with each other again. And so it's so much more interesting that they have this, you know, clear feelings for each other, but those are complicated feelings because there's tension there. But at the same time that, like, we're dealing with, you know, he doesn't want anybody to be killed by these bad guys. There's also this element of like, what if that was our last conversation?
Right.
And I think that some of the real subtle performance and writing stuff that they do with them before everything goes down is really carries a lot of weight for that.
I agree.
Yeah. It also
So Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things, though, that I actually had a thought about this movie, watching it for the first time, or not for the first time, watching it this time, I mean, for the podcast, was that I kind of want to see them make kind of a reverse Die Hard, where it's exactly the same premise, only we're on the bad, like on the criminals' side.
So like a Wicked.
Yeah, I guess, you know, like the idea that, you know, you have these guys trying to rip off the, you know, because who are the good guys in this movie, right? It's the big corporation and the cops, right? And so not to say that that is like as presented in the movie, the bad guys are bad guys. They're planning to kill everybody in the building, even if everything goes according to the plan, right? Like they're bad. But we could imagine a version of this movie Like, even in this version, there are several sequences where we are put in a position of rooting for them, right? Because we like John and we like Powell. We don't like any of the rest of the cops, right? They're all, well, it's weird. Like, this movie has our alliances for various characters shift all over the place. Because we have the Breakfast Club vice principal guy, right? Who we hate until the FBI guys take over the case from him. And then he's on our side too, right? Like, it's weird. But the idea though, that we could imagine people trying to take back money stolen by the big corporation, but they're dealing with the gung-ho rent-a-cop who's running around turning everything into a gunfight when they're trying to just make it be a no violence deal. Like, I feel like that could be fun. And I was, and as I was just kind of musing on this, I was thinking about like this movie, but everyone is the sort of the mirror, dark universe version of themselves. Like, just, flip flop the emotional or the ethical axis of every character to see and see what that movie would be like. But then as I was imagining that, I was saying Ellis would be the one character who stays exactly the same.
Yes.
But yeah, I certainly there are lots of movies and shows out there that have put us in the shoes of rooting for the criminals. Like Ocean's 11, for example, right? Most heist movies. In the chat we have Trauma Train Rich saying, watch the show Money Heist on Netflix. The robbers are the good guys, the police and government are the bad guys. I haven't seen that one specifically, but yeah. But I think in this particular case, what I was thinking watching it was like, but I want to see like the Die Hard scenario like that. I would be interested. Right. But in any case, like thematically, aw.
You want your dinner?
There's a puppy. So, so we have, though, thematically, where we come back to, like, what's Christmassy about this other than just the trappings of taking place at Christmas. We also have the emotional tension underneath wanting to just save everybody from the bad guys is wanting to reconcile with his wife. Right? Recognizing, and in fact, actually, when he's in his, when he's kind of at his lowest point and he's not able to talk to her, and he has that whole scene where he's talking to Powell on the radio and basically saying, I'm starting to get a bad feeling like I'm not going to make it out of this. And he just starts going into, like, not blaming her for anything, but just, like, basically saying, like, I'm the one that screwed this up because I didn't believe in her. I didn't support her when she had this big opportunity, and just kind of being able to sort of recognize his failings in there and not blame her for any of it. And not to say that I'm sure we can imagine that there was a little bit of, like barbs being flung in both directions there, but nonetheless, him coming to a point where he's able to forgive anything that she's done and recognize the things that he's done and want to do better. And so that's certainly a Christmas type of theme, right? This idea of wanting to, reunite by like shedding the bad things done in the past, like atoning for them and wanting to be better. Like there's almost
redemption.
Yeah. Like, so there's very, like, that's a Christmassy kind of theme.
So honestly, like, there's a sort of sacrificial part that he's playing too. Because he could have, once he got away from the bad guys, like, he could have got out. Like, he could have just left. Yeah. But he's, slightly martyring himself, essentially to try to help all these other people.
Yeah. Well, and I like too, this is less about the thematic stuff, but just more about one of the things that's so smart about this script is that there's not really any moments in the movie that really sort of playing against our understanding of how the world works, in the sense that he starts by trying to do all of the reasonable things. Like, okay, it would be crazy for me to just try to rush all of these guys with machine guns when there's a bunch of hostages. So how about I not do that? And instead, well, the phones are cut off, so I can't call anyone. But what if I pull the fire alarm? Oh no, they rerouted that. So now what do I do? And he gets on an emergency band radio, right? Like, he finds one of those and he's calling on that. They don't quite believe him, but they send the one car out. And then, that guy's about to leave. And at this point he's like, oh my God, what else can I do? And that's when tosses the one body of the guy he's killed out the window. Classic, welcome to the party, pal. Although we have to also recognize that is immediately followed by the bad guys unloading a machine gun on Paul's car, and he barely survives. That could have been, that could have been a different outcome had that gone differently. But in the point just being that the script does such a good job of really forcing his hand, right? Like, the only thing that he could have done that he didn't do is nothing, right? He could have just found some place to hide and waited for it to all resolve. And what we know by the end of the movie is that would have resulted in everybody else getting killed.
Right.
And the bad guys getting away with the money. And so he is not willing to do that. But he tries everything else he can before... like he's not trying to just go in there guns blazing. He's trying to do it as smart as he can by including, calls to all sorts of other authorities. But it just happens that this movie takes place in a world somewhat like our real one, where the authorities are not always as helpful as we would like them to be. I think it is kind of incredible, though, like I was saying, that what this movie does as far as where not like our sympathies, but like our emotional investment stands with all of these different characters. Like, we're always on John and Powell's side, but there are definitely points where we are cheering for the robbers as they fend off the other cops, right? And then, like that same guy that I was just talking about, like, he's the one that's giving Powell a hard time. We don't like him. He's the one that, like, shut up, put the other guy back on the phone, that sort of thing. But then when the FBI guys show up, all of a sudden that guy switches teams to the one on our guy's side. And there's just so many weird details, like, I'm Agent Johnson and this is Special Agent Johnson, and one's a white guy and the one's a black guy, and he says no relation. And just little details that they give these guys that are otherwise would just be total cardboard cutouts, like the bit when they were planning to just unload on the criminals from the helicopters, and the one guy's going like, just like back in Vietnam, and the other guy's like, I was in middle school, dude, or junior high, or whatever he said. It's like, what are you talking? But yeah, so in any case, we could just talk about fun details from Die Hard all day. But so let's I guess come back to Love Actually then, in terms of what are our Christmas related themes. We talked a little bit about the weirdness of It's Christmas and on Christmas You Tell the Truth, which the movie kind of presents as a theme, even though I don't think it seems like it's a little bit made up. But that doesn't mean we can't accept it at face value within the movie itself, right? Like, for the characters, it seems meaningful. So obviously Andrew Lincoln's character puts that on one of his little cue cards.
Yeah.
Right? Does anyone else say that? Like, I think it kind of comes up indirectly in a couple places, but...
Yeah, who said it? Someone else says it overtly. I can't remember which one. But there is another, that it does come up another time.
I'm going to, just real quick, I'm going to say, on Christmas, you tell the truth. Let's see what comes up. At Christmas, you tell the truth. The first 10 links are all about the cue card scene. But in any case, I think it certainly ties in to the fact that a lot of the presented difficulties in a whole bunch of these relationships come down to people being afraid to act, right? Because we've got the little kid who's in that boat, like this classmate of his that doesn't even know I exist, and there's no point at which Liam Neeson says, "Have you tried having a conversation with her?" No, we're going to spend 2 weeks learning the drums instead. And then also, I guess, get to do a drum solo in the Christmas production, even though you've just taken them up. All right, sure. It's Christmas, so it's Christmas magic.
Matter.
Christmas drums. But certainly that's the point in that relationship is that the kid is in love, but he's too afraid to, like, tell her, right? We have Andrew Lincoln's character who's kind of in that boat where, like, in his case, the fear is a little bit more justified in the sense that, like, the girl he loves is married to his best friend already. So that's, a reason not to say anything. But then you have Laura Linney's character who's afraid to act. Although, like, what are we meant to take away from her story, do you think? Because if anyone doesn't remember, Laura Linney's character, she's been pining after the coworker, but then finally gets to go out on a date with him, and it's going really well, except that she keeps getting phone calls from her brother who's in an institution.
I thought we were supposed to just take from it that sometimes, like, family is more important, like, than something that you thought you really wanted. Like, you're willing to sacrifice something you always wanted for your family, even if it's difficult,
Yeah. I
thought that's what it was, but
I think you're probably right. It just feels a little bit like I sort of maybe part of it is just my resentment at how unreasonable the other guy is about it. Like, she's like on the same, like, to flip that story a little bit, we could also say her brother is in an institution where he's surrounded by doctors who are taking care of him. So probably it is actually a little bit unhealthy on her part to feel like she has to drop everything to answer the phone every time he calls.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can understand why she does, but probably there are times where it would be okay for her, for her to have her own life. But on the flip side of that, though, she's clearly dealing with an important family situation, and for that guy to be basically saying, like, you hurt my feelings by answering the phone when we're making out, so therefore relationship over. And they're like, all right, well, okay. That's a little harsh, but
I think that's also part of the lesson is that maybe sometimes just because you pine for somebody because they're attractive doesn't mean they're a great person.
There you go. All the more reason to go ahead and find that out instead of just pining after them for 2 years, working in a job that you didn't actually want otherwise. But yeah, so, and then let's see, we also have, we have several cases where someone is afraid to act, and they may have good reasons for that. Like, for example, Hugh Grant is clearly attracted to one of his assistants, as he is the prime minister. She's working for him, and yeah, actually, it's probably pretty inappropriate for him to try to engage in a relationship with her under those circumstances. Although, letting her think that it's her fault that she gets transferred somewhere, and just never saying anything about it is maybe not the best way to handle that either. But, well, okay. I want to touch, separate from that. One of the things I learned about this movie in this most recent watch and looking at some of the trivia and stuff like that is that the whole bit where Billy Bob Thornton as the American president starts like trying to move in on his girl that he can't move in on himself, and that inspires the Prime Minister of Britain to give a speech to the face of the American president, basically saying, "You're bullying us and no more, and we're going to stand up to you and be strong." The actual real Prime Minister of Britain had to make a statement about how, okay, that's a movie. In the real world, there are consequences to that sort of thing. um, but that's a weird theme too, because like in that case, it sounds, not to say that the United States has always been a great partner to the UK, or that the UK has always been great at everything else either. But the like that, all of that besides, that's another kind of expression of being afraid to say what you really think until something gives you the courage to do it, right? And we could definitely say that there's some weirdness about how exactly that goes down in there, but just it all is part of that same theme, right? Of
Right.
being willing to actually say something and do something. I just realized that I think the only plot line that we haven't said anything about in Love Actually yet is the Colin Firth one.
Colin Firth. Yeah.
Yeah. Where, like, it's kind of cleverly done, but it's also a scenario where, like, they sort of fall in love with each other while not able to speak the same language at all. And most of the things that they say to each other when they know that the other can't understand them are kind of actually mean things. Like she calls him fat a whole bunch. So that one's a little weird, I think. Not that they're all, we talked about that, but like that one, I think, like I struggled with a little bit more too, just because I felt like I don't know. The chemistry there for that one didn't work as well as some of the others for me. But I don't know. What else do we have in terms of like, is there any other sort of Christmas related themes other than the idea that like it's a special time which might inspire you to take action or say something that you have been afraid to do or say before?
No, I think we've already covered most of it. I mean, the fact that, yeah, the whole point is that Christmas sometimes reminds you that love, which is the whole point, like quote of the movie, like love is actually all around. You just have to be willing to like step into it, right? Like it's there. You just have to join into it, and Christmas helps you remember that. And then honestly, like I think I said earlier, like part of the Christmassy part of this movie is the idea of just kind of leaning into the just joy and fantasy of like the time, and not nitpicking all of the, your relatives or whatever, like whatever you're doing, like let's just let it be. Mm-hmm. As this is the time when it's actually okay to just enjoy something, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the movie just sort of is like that,
I was amused because when you were sort of specifically evoking the title in order to kind of make the point that the title theoretically is making, you actually didn't say it the way that the movie does, which I only call out because the way that the movie says it, the way Hugh Grant says that line, is weird. It feels weird when he says it. He has a weird cadence to it. Because he says, you'll find that love, actually, is all around. And I guess it's because he's making a reference to the song "Love Is All Around," and he's like, and it actually is all around. But he says it's still a little weird. And then the other place that song is evoked in the movie is where they're explicitly changing the lyrics to where it's Christmas is all around instead of love. I feel like the title is another example of something that feels a little bit strange to me. But it at the same time, it's memorable, which is kind of what they're going for ultimately, I think. I just sort of, maybe it's just a matter of like when I think of the title, I I feel like it should be the answer to a question as opposed to a declarative statement. You know what I mean? Like, does that make any sense when I say that? Like,
Yeah, I think so.
you know, it's like, what is all around? And you say, love, actually, instead of declaring, love, actually, is all around. Like that, I don't know, that anyway, that's maybe an extreme nitpick. But I think we've talked about, you know, amount of Christmas imagery and trappings and story and theme and everything. And so I don't know. Do we have any other conclusions to make, given our analysis of these 4 Christmas movies?
No. Sorry, my dog is really trying to eat.
Well, so how about then?
Like, am I not sitting in the right place? Am I not doing this quite right? Like, let me stare into your soul a little bit more. Buddy, I'm going to feed you in a second. It's fine. You're fine.
So perhaps then it is just down to for us to choose our movies for the next the next theme.
Staring at us.
Offline, the two of us have discussed a couple of different possibilities for topics. There's both the idea of like movies we've always meant to see, but just kind of never got around to. I also had thought about the idea of, you know, there were certainly several cases where we were talking about these big famous classics that didn't win Best Picture and lost it to something that nobody ever talks about anymore. And maybe we watch some of those movies. And I actually did pull up a list of like some of the examples of that we could potentially do. But I don't know. Do you have any? You have a preference or one or the other of those, or something else?
I hadn't really thought more past that because I thought both those were pretty good ideas. I think I like the one you just talked about where things that won over. Mm-hmm. It makes it easier because I haven't done a lot of thinking of like what are I always meant to watch movies, sure. You know. Mm-hmm. So I think this makes it easier to just kind of pick a couple of movies off of a list that you've already compiled. Yeah.
Well, the last time we mentioned it, the movie that came to mind for you was Speed Racer, but
I know why. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but that's fine. So like the
I don't watch it though.
Well, I've
always meant to, but I also don't really. I'm not.
Well, see, but like that would like as much as I love that movie, that would not be a good fit for our topic because the whole point is it's something that you kind of actually do want to see. You always meant to see. You just somehow never got around to it, as opposed to something that you sort of feel like you should see, but you don't really want to. Like that's not the point.
Yeah, which is how that one was. Like I feel like I should see it because people that I trust like you really enjoyed it. I feel like there's something to it. I'm just not interested in it. I'm not.
You know, and that's okay. It's polite. You know what? I give you my permission to not watch Speed Racer. How about that?
I will continue to not watch Speed Racer.
All right. Then. But in the context of big famous movies that didn't win Best Picture and lost it to something else, some of the examples I pulled up is Vertigo lost to a movie called Gigi. Singin' in the Rain lost to another movie called The Greatest Show on Earth. Raging Bull lost to a movie called Ordinary People. And Citizen Kane lost to a movie called How Green Was My Valley. So these are like big movies that are high up on the AFI list that lost out in that year to movies that nobody talks about anymore. So what's up with that? So I don't know. What do you want to? Do you want to talk about How Green Was My Valley and Ordinary People?
Those are the two that I'm most. I mean, I've seen Ordinary People. Been a long time. It's good. some, what did it beat? Raging Bull? It's not
Yeah.
Raging Bull good. Yeah, let's watch those.
Okay. Well, in fact, actually, I think there was a couple of other big movies in those years. Let me. I'm just gonna really. I believe I only wrote down the specific movie from the list and then what was beat that year, but I'm suddenly wanting to know like what other movies were it beat. Let me have a moment. I'm sorry.
It's just giving me a chance to feed him so he stops crying.
Yeah. So okay. So 1981. It was the year that Ordinary People won. Won that the Best Picture category. And, I swear. Okay, and then so it won against Raging Bull, Coal Miner's Daughter, Tess, and The Elephant Man, which are like I'm aware of those, but wasn't especially like it's there were some years where like we had 3 heavy hitters in the running and then something else wins, but so that was the other thing that I did when I was sort of putting together these examples. Is it's one thing when we say this movie's high up on the list but it didn't win Best Picture, and that's because what did win was another movie that was on the list. So these were specific examples that were not on the list and I feel like don't really get talked about anymore, that at that time beat out the ones that we do talk about still. So that would be so then for next time we're going to talk about whatever happened to How Green Was My Valley and Ordinary People.
Yep.
All right, so thank you everyone for listening and or watching, and we'll be back to talk about those movies, and in the meantime, go watch some good movies.
Watch good movies.